He called an entire country's beef rubbish on live television. No data, no taste test, just anger. It should have been a throwaway line, the kind of thing a celebrity says, gets dragged for online and forgets by Tuesday. Instead, it became the opening move of one of the strangest business stories in modern farming. Here's the thing nobody expected. Jeremy Clarkson didn't even want cows. When he bought Diddly Squat, the plan was simple. Wheat, barley, rapeseed. Crops that grow themselves and never once look at you like you've personally failed them. Sheep came next, almost by accident, because a neighbor mentioned the fields needed grazing, and sheep seemed low maintenance. Relatively speaking, cattle were different. Cattle were a decision, and that decision was born out of pure irritation. Late 2021, Britain signs a trade deal with Australia. Tariffs on Australian beef start disappearing. To farmers already surviving on margins thinner than a supermarket receipt, this looked like an open invitation for cheap imported meat to flood the market they were barely holding on to. Clarkson, a man who had just spent a year learning exactly how brutal those margins already were, took it personally. And that's when the logic clicked into place. If cheap imports were coming, you don't compete with them. You make something they can't touch. Grass-fed, local, traceable to one field in Oxfordshire. So the plan was set. Buy cattle, raise them properly, open a restaurant that serves nothing but what the farm actually grows. On paper, a solid strategy. In reality, it meant a man who had owned this land for over a decade, without ever once touching a cow, was about to become a cattle farmer overnight. He found out fast how little he knew. At the cattle auction, his land agent stood beside him doing the math Clarkson refused to do himself. And Clarkson compared the price of a cow to the price of a used car, which tells you everything about how a man who has never owned livestock processes buying a living, breathing animal. By his own admission, year one was chaos. "It's been a year of total disasters," he said on camera. "I shouldn't have had cows." That single sentence is why this story works at all. Clarkson never pretended he knew what he was doing. He filmed the disasters instead of hiding them. And that decision, the choice to be embarrassingly honest, is the actual foundation this entire business was built on. Now here's where it stops being about ego and starts being about genuine skill. When choosing a breed, Clarkson had two paths. Continental cattle, big, muscular, fast-growing, magnificent to look at. Or native British breeds, smaller, slower, built for exactly this rain and this grass. He picked native, the Beef Shorthorn. And underneath the jokes, the reasoning actually held up. Continental breeds need extra feed, imported grain, supplements to develop proper flavor. Native breeds finish on grass alone, because that's the exact diet nature designed them for. There's a reward for that patience too. For years, the industry pushed lean beef as the healthy choice. But tastes changed. Chefs now chase marbling, the thin threads of fat that make a steak actually taste like something. And native breeds produce that naturally, on nothing more than English rain. So when Clarkson stood in a field and called Australian beef rubbish, he wasn't just performing outrage for the cameras. He was, badly, bluntly, without footnotes, making an argument British farmers had been making quietly for years. Grass-fed, slow-grown, native beef is a genuinely different product. He just said it to several million people at once. Not every cow made it to a plate, by the way. One Shorthorn never managed to get pregnant. By spreadsheet logic, that's a cow not earning her keep. Clarkson kept her anyway. She lives out her days as, essentially, a very expensive pet. Small detail, but it tells you something about what actually mattered to him when the cameras weren't asking for a punchline. Because farming, it turns out, doesn't care about your intentions. Bovine tuberculosis has been quietly devastating cattle herds across the Cotswolds for years. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care who you are. When it hits, animals are slaughtered, movement is restricted, years of breeding work disappear in a single vet visit. Diddly Squat wasn't spared, and Clarkson, to his credit, didn't cut the disaster from the show. He filmed it, including the uncomfortable badger conversation, a debate where farmers and the general public sit on opposite sides of an issue involving an animal most of Britain grew up loving in picture books. He could have softened it, made it safe. Instead, he left it exactly as messy as it actually was, because softening it would have cost him the one audience whose respect he actually needed. Farmers. And that's precisely why, when he finally started selling that beef, people weren't just buying meat with a celebrity's name stamped on it. They were buying meat from a farm whose failures they'd already watched, in detail, for years. You cannot buy that kind of trust with an advertising budget. You can only earn it the hard way, on camera. Now here's the part that actually turns a grudge into a functioning business. Most farmers sell cattle to a processor, who sells to a distributor, who sells to a supermarket, who finally sells to you. At every stage, a slice of the profit disappears, and the farmer, the person who did 2 years of actual work, ends up with the smallest cut of all. Clarkson cut nearly all of those steps out. His beef goes straight from the farm to 2 places. The diddly squat farm shop, where it sits next to a burger sauce labeled, in exactly the tone you'd expect, as coming from beef that definitely didn't die of boredom. A joke on the label. And also quietly, the entire sales pitch. The second is the farmer's dog, the pub he opened specifically to serve nothing but local, farm-grown food, where that same beef gets seared, rested, and plated by people who know exactly which field it came from, at a serious markup. Margin that would otherwise have gone straight into someone else's account. This is the part people miss. Clarkson isn't competing on price. He's selling on story. On the fact that you watch this exact animal's entire journey unfold on television, disasters and all, for free, over several years. That loop runs both directions too. The shop and restaurant need more beef than his own herd alone can supply. So local cattle breeders now supply extra stock to keep up. Which means Clarkson's business isn't just profiting Clarkson. It's become a guaranteed buyer for his neighbors' herds, too. In an industry where a guaranteed buyer, at a fair price with no supermarket contract involved, is close to the rarest thing you'll find. So, does it actually work? Unevenly. Clarkson would be the first to admit it, probably while glaring at the sky like the weather owes him money personally. Year 1 made a legendary, laughably small profit. Other years, drought and disease wiped out margins that looked solid on paper back in spring. But the beef operation specifically has become one of the genuine bright spots. Industry estimates now put the value of what he's built, the herd, the shop, the restaurant, the brand, somewhere around £6 million. And here's why supermarkets can't simply copy it. They can undercut on price. They can source cheaper meat from anywhere on earth. What they cannot manufacture is 6 years of a man's genuinely messy, filmed relationship with the specific field your steak came from. That's not a supply chain advantage. That's an emotional one. And those don't show up on a spreadsheet until a competitor tries to replicate it and quietly can't. So go back to where this started. One angry sentence about a trade deal. It led him to buy animals he didn't understand. To choose a breed for reasons that turned out to be genuinely sound. To build a shop and restaurant so he'd never have to sell through a supermarket. To film the disasters instead of hiding them, which is exactly what gave the final product its credibility. He said something rash because he was angry. And by stubbornness, and a refusal to lie about what was actually happening, he built the very thing he claimed British farming needed. Not a slogan, a working example. So here's the real question. Did Clarkson stumble into a genuinely sound business model, or did he just get remarkably lucky with the timing? Drop your answer in the comments, and make sure to subscribe our channel.